I had a very difficult time with mental health, with addiction, with stress. This sort of journey into mindfulness carried me through so much. It's been kind of fascinating to me see what's unfolded internally and externally in my life. We change.
That's massive change. One decision changes the course of life. My guest is Dr. Christopher Willard, clinical psychologist, mindfulness teacher, author, and faculty member at Harvard Medical School. In this episode, you'll learn how to work with emotions without shutting down and how to build after being in a dark place. Dr. Willard, a warm welcome to you to Pause to Elevate.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I'm excited to have this conversation. It's been a long time coming and looking forward to digging in.
Thank you so much. You have such a vast area of expertise and depth. So I've been so excited to connect with you. And I wonder if we can begin with your journey into meditation, mindfulness, because here you have an intersection of psychology, self-compassion, mental health. How did you get started with meditation?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a few different ways to tell the story. And often when I'm leading workshops, I talk about how, growing up, I never heard that word mindfulness, even though for a lot of us, we probably had experiences that were something like mindfulness that I think planted the seeds in us to reconnect to later when it was time for them to blossom, really. And I think about going to nature camp and them saying, we're going to, listen like a deer, notice all the sounds around you, or we're going to walk like ninjas as silently as we can, and realizing later that those were really, if you try to walk silently, you're focused on each footstep and you're noticing the movement of each muscle and the texture of the ground. And it's a lot like the mindful walking instructions or to listen to all the sound, right? So that kind of thing sort of always stayed with me. And then when I was in college, I had or university, as you might say in Canada, I had a very difficult time with mental health, with addiction, with stress. And what I thought was going to be a semester turned into 2 years. Things got worse. My addiction spiraled. At some point, about a year in, my parents dragged me onto a retreat with Thich Nhat Hanh, who probably listeners are familiar with. Yes. And it was on that retreat that things just kind of cracked open for me. I suddenly felt more connected to the world. I could kind of see more clearly, kind of what was happening, the impact I was having on myself and others. I felt kind of a sense of hope for the first time. And that was many years ago. Now, a few decades, I've been kind of much healthier since then, clean and sober for 25 years at this point.
Oh, wow. Amazing.
Kind of
Congratulations.
Thank you. But a lot of just other amazing changes, including this sort of journey into mindfulness that carried me through so much. And then into being a special education teacher, and then into graduate school where I did some research on mindfulness, and then that turned into writing a book, and then somehow that turned into public speaking, which I never wanted to do. That turned into more books, and it's how did I get here? I'm on some flight to Jordan, and I'm what am I doing here? It's just been amazing journey, and then into parenting in this last decade. So I just feel like my life is unbelievable, and kind of through mindfulness, it's been just kind of fascinating to me see what's unfolded internally and externally in my life. So that's a little bit of my short version of my backstory. I guess we could say. Yeah.
But how amazing it is. Sometimes, one decision changes the course of life, right? One decision, sometimes we're one decision away with a fork in the road. And here you were struggling with addiction and, university, as you're saying. And then here you heard about Thich Nhat Hanh, this Vietnamese monk master, really, who passed away. And something, I wonder, what about that? What happened there? I had a chance to be with Thich Nhat Hanh as well myself, and it was profound for me. But I want to know for you, what happened there? Because someone who's never done mindfulness or even done mindfulness go, well, what happened?
Yeah. It was, what's funny is it's not I think one thing that's interesting is what kind of happened for me was actually, those activities where it's eat the raisin and think about where the raisin came from, and, kind of all the people that were involved in planting the raisins and picking the raisins. It was actually like that kind of exercise. Suddenly I was actually thinking, about the consequences of my behavior doing drugs. And there I was, this like very self-righteous, like 22-year-old, like vegetarian, meditating, telling everyone what to do with their lives, and, boycotting Nike, and, going to protests. And then I'm like, what am I doing here in terms of like the consequences of,
Oh,
like contributing to, like child slavery and working in, like heroin factories, or, kind of like war and human rights violations in Colombia. And like, I mean, that sounds like so grandiose, but that actually really is like a
yeah.
big part of like seeing the interbeing, actually, which Ty so emphasizes, is
Mm,
actually really what kind of helped me kind of have this insight into how destructive my behavior was, more than sort of like, my parents telling me that, or the other, kind of things. It was like that's actually kind of seeing the ripple effect, both backwards toward people,
mm.
in the sort of neighborhoods I was impacting, and kind of forwards to people in my life. And like that's actually what really was kind of enlightening to me in that moment, believe it or not. Yeah.
That's really beautiful. I mean, that's when you're describing it, awakening. You know, a lot of
Hmm.
times there's talk like, "What is awakening?" We all want to awaken to a better version of ourselves or something, but here it
Right.
is. Like you were able to see something you couldn't see before the
Hmm.
retreat, before going iftar. You
Yeah.
couldn't see an element like blind spot, and we all have them,
Right.
and you couldn't see the
Hmm.
effect that this was having and your
Yeah.
contribution on this bigger, as Thich Nhat Hanh says, interbeing, right? Like this connectivity,
Hmm.
how everything is connected, and
Right.
seeing the impact on, wow, even you said like child slavery and heroin and like
Right. So it's like,
drugs. It's like,
yeah, it's
wow,
like if
what a
I'm not buying
moment.
these clothes because they come from a sweatshop, like then why am I buying this heroin that comes from God knows where? I mean, like totally
Amazing.
ridiculous, but at the same time, like profound. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So there you have, you know, there's sometimes there's like these breakthroughs, moments of awakening, and then people um, don't build on them. So for you, there you were, you had that big insight, big, phew.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then the journey though in being sober just doesn't. I'm sure it has ups and downs. So what helped you
Yeah.
keep going on that track for those who are wanting to create change, whether it's addiction or unhelpful patterns of coping? It's like you kept steady for 25, I mean
Yeah.
25 years sober. That's, do you know what I mean? Like, and from heroin, like that's not a, that's a massive change, right? So
Yeah.
what helps you keep going? What helped you after that insight to establish this new path where you help so many people now?
I know it's kind. Yeah, and actually, that's the next thing I want to write about in a few years, is more about kind of not just mindfulness and compassion, but also just sort of deeper dharma. Actually, if we're allowed
Mm,
to stray from the secular here, and
mm,
recovery and addiction. But I mean, it was a lot of things. I mean, it was community. It was community in the spiritual sense of having other people to meditate with. It was community in
mm.
terms of like recovery groups that I went to. It was because I think that's what's so hard about practice, is doing it on our own, right?
Yeah,
So finding other people to practice with
yeah.
being huge. I think also, like one of the things that happens is that we change. And I think where people get stuck in practice or give up practices, I mean, we all know the basic reasons why it's hard, but I think allowing our practice to change as we practice, so
Mm,
that for a time it was like so many visualizations, and actually like the Thich Nhat Hanh visualizations of like, breathing in, I see myself as a mountain, and breathing out, I feel
right.
confident.
Yes.
Like that was like about all I could handle in the early days, was like, or maybe
Mm,
a John Kabat-Zinn 20-minute lake or mountain meditation, like listening to the audio of it and that
mm,
kind of thing. And then it was like adapting that into my own, sort of, breathing in, I see myself as a mountain, and breathing out, I know I'm, can be steady and not be, tempted by drugs and alcohol, or, whatever it might be. And so allowing it to shift, and then coming into like times where it was like, I am just going to focus on my breath and be like Mr., study each breath. And then like that shifted too, and like realizing like the power of self-compassion and self-forgiveness
mm.
becoming really important at different phases in my life, or at different phases in my own recovery, as I looked back at damage I'd done. or looking at, other, looking at, I remember at one point in graduate school at this internship being just so unbelievably burned out, and working
Yeah.
in this like school system where like everyone was burned out, and the everyone was such a jerk, and like being like talking to my meditation teacher, and she's like, time for more metta and compassion practice, and like that was transformative, and then back to visualizations, and then going from breath and changing to just sensory, noticing sounds around me, kind of like I did when I was a kid, and that has
Mm.
guided me a lot more again, and now it's a little bit back to breath again. And so letting myself like
Mm.
kind of evolve and let my practice evolve with what my needs are in my life, rather than like there's only one way to do this.
Mm.
So yeah,
But
that's
there's a
also been
thread
important.
that continued though. Like the if we say the essence continued, but the form changed, right? Like the form of the
Hmm.
practice changed, but you continued practice. Like there's a steadiness, and I love the permission giving of the form may change over time. And you actually remind me when I began my meditation journey, it was very harsh right away. I'm like, it was
Yeah.
vipassana. It was like two
Hmm.
slots of 1 hour each a day, morning 1 hour, night 1 hour, and I was kind of missing the point for a while.
Yeah.
If I
Yeah.
miss a
Yeah.
practice, I'm like, I
Totally.
failed at this. I missed the point.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
then I experienced Thich Nhat Hanh's work, and then the monks were singing, and everyone's so joyous. And I was
Hmm.
actually annoyed
Hmm.
for a while. I'm like, are we gonna meditate here or what? Like, are we just gonna sing? Like, I was, but it showed me areas that I didn't see that became very rigid in me.
Yeah.
And I can
Yeah.
so relate to what
Yeah.
you're saying. Sometimes we get fixated on
Yeah.
practice rather than
Yeah.
continue evolving. And yeah.
And in teaching, I think one other journey that for me has been a thing is like a lot of my early work started with like, how do I teach mindfulness to kids, or kind of mind body
Mm,
regulation practices to kids, and feeling this sort of like, a lot of my teachers were very serious and a lot of kind of gravitas, and I was really
mm,
drawn to that when I was younger.
yeah.
That's the only way to teach, and then realizing like actually the best teaching is the more authentic that we can be, right?
Yeah.
And if I'm a little bit of like a goofy middle-aged white guy, then I'm going to be a little bit of a goofy middle-aged white guy persona
Oh
in my
yeah, yeah.
teaching. I don't have to be Mr. Gravitas. I don't have to be Thich Nhat Hanh. I don't have to be John
Right.
Kabat-Zinn. I also don't have to be a comedian, but I can be just who I am, and that authenticity is what shines through, not
Yeah.
the act of gravitas. And if I make a corny dad joke in my teaching, like, well, I'm a dad, like
Yeah,
that
yeah,
works,
totally.
right? So it's like being ourselves actually is what ends up shining through. That's half the teaching, is the
Totally.
authenticity, right? Yeah.
Totally. That's one of the reasons I so love teaching too. I am so with you. And I see, I do teacher training and mindfulness as well. And I see folks who struggle sometimes to be like someone else rather
Yeah.
than be
Yeah.
who they are. As soon as they allow themselves to be who they are, they just shine.
Yeah.
Because we're
Right.
humans. We relate
Right.
to just how we are rather than what I'm
Exactly.
supposed to be.
Yeah.
I'm supposed to be
Yeah.
this serious meditator, and everything has to be
Yeah.
very, so we have
Yeah.
misconceptions. And so I wonder, what have you found in your work that people have misconceptions, especially around mental health and mindfulness? Is there things, because I know I come across a lot of misconceptions about mindfulness, and is there things that come up for you that you see people, whether clients you work with one on one or the different workshops and courses you offer?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually, like, and that gravitas thing is one of them, and
Yeah.
that kind of like imitating is one of them too. And really, like, I think about my friend Sam Himmelstein, who's done a lot of work with
Mm.
teenagers, and he has some line about sort of like, if you show that you're comfortable being yourself, you give everyone else in the room permission to be comfortable with themselves. And a
Yes.
lot of people are coming to these practices or coming to therapy, right, because they're not comfortable with themselves somehow. So the more we can kind of model and show that, again, that's like the intuitive teaching, the implicit teaching, as well as the explicit teaching.
Mm.
So I think as I teach people to be teachers, that's part of it. But I think, again, this sort of, there's a double question here about what are misconceptions.
Yes.
Misconceptions for teachers as well as for learners. But starting with learners, I think that, like, I mean, again, one thing I also remind us is we don't sort of like sit in stillness so that we can become good at being still. We sit in stillness so that we can then become good at like moving with action when it's, kind of like when it's time to take skillful action. We don't sit in silence to get good at shutting up. We sit in silence, so that when we speak, right, we can be more effective in our speech. And I think that's really important to emphasize, that this is practice on the cushion for life off the cushion. So I think that's really important to kind of try to get through to people as well. As well as the misconceptions. I think, again, back to a lot of my work about like kids, it's like, oh, well, like good luck with getting kids to like stand still or
Yeah.
sit still. And some of that is like, yeah, well then let's not do that. Like, like
Mm,
let's have it be in movement. Let's have it be loud. Let's have it be quiet. Let's have it be in contrast. Let's have it be,
yeah.
playful. And so that's part of it. But then even other things like, well, if you want stillness, I take take when they said, when we were kids, walk like a ninja. It's like, well, that's
Yeah.
using play to then actually teach someone how to walk mindfully. Listen like a deer or a rabbit that can hear 360 degrees, notice sounds from the left and the right and in front of you, behind you. Cup your ears forward, cup your ears backward, notice what you hear. Like that's using play. Or like
Mm.
there's this child development guy, Lev Vygotsky, and he did this experiment way before the mindfulness trend in like the 60s or something, where he was trying to get kids to stand still, like 8-year-olds. You can probably imagine how well this went, right? So he tells them to stand still. 5 minutes later, they're running around. And he calls them back in. He says, all right, guys, I want you to stand still for as long as you can. But this time, I want you to imagine that you're like a knight guarding a castle.
Mm. Oh wow.
And what happens? So then this time, the kids are standing still for like 15 minutes. And it's
Wow.
like, we make it a game, we make it playful, we make it a little bit of a competition, even, right? We make it fun. And then it's like we're still activating our prefrontal and insular cortices, and we're quieting down our amygdala and our limbic system. And, but it's using visualization, it's using play as the
Mm.
anchor of attention, not focus on your breath as the anchor of attention. So that kind of thing, I think, is also really important in teaching this. Is figuring out what is it that people need, like, because it's not always stillness for someone or silence for someone, or if it is, right, how do we get there? What are the
Right.
training wheels we use to help them access that? And I think that's kind of what it is. Yeah.
It's time for a quick little update. A few months ago, 2.5% of you who are watching this content were subscribed to this channel. I'm so grateful to you. You helped us move it to 20%. However, if we do the math, that still leaves us 80% of you have not subscribed. Please help me change that. Go ahead and press that subscribe button. Thank you so much. Let's get back to the content. That is so beautiful. You made me actually remember, as a kid, when you're talking about all the
Mm-hmm.
things that we are present with as kid happen more naturally. And I don't know
Yeah.
why, when you're sharing this, it remind me of being in the back seat of a car, parents traveling, and when it's raining, look at the window and see which of the raindrops wins as it goes from the top to the bottom. That used to excite me. Like I'm like
Ooh,
watching
yeah,
raindrop, like
yeah.
which one is gonna win? And I was, like, and now as adults, it's like, who cares? It's raining. You know what I mean?
Right,
Like,
right.
yeah, we lose the
Yeah, yeah.
curiosity.
Well, curiosity is such an interesting thing. Like, I don't know if one person you should talk to is Judd Brewer, but
I
he's
have
done a lot
actually.
about mindfulness and addiction. But he's done all this
Yes.
research lately about curiosity, and
Yeah.
curiosity kind of shutting down anxiety in the brain. And I've gotten so interested in like
Yeah.
what's the relationship between curiosity and mindfulness, curiosity and awe and mindfulness, awe and wonder. Like, what are all these things doing in the brain? Like, it's so interesting, all that stuff. Yeah,
It's fascinating. Yeah, I've had him
yeah,
twice actually on the podcast, and
awesome.
we
Yeah,
talked. Yeah, he calls it
great guy.
superpower, curiosity
Yeah,
as a superpower,
totally.
and I love that. And
Yeah,
working with
yeah.
addiction, working with eating, like
Mm-hmm.
mindless eating
Mm-hmm.
and eating
Yeah.
disorders, and it's like using mindfulness. And the thing of curiosity is, when we're upset, we end up judging things. What's wrong with me? Why am I doing this?
Uh-huh.
Look at me, which is missing the self compassion that you
Yeah.
bring in, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So curiosity. since we named kind of self-compassion as well, can you share for folks who maybe it's new, because sometimes there's misconception of self-compassion. Oh, it's weak. Like, what am I going to be, a doormat and just be you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
so
totally,
how
totally.
can self-compassion help us
Hmm.
in our life?
Yeah. I mean, to me, this kind of self compassion came in, to my practice. I don't know, 12 or 15 years in. One of my mentors, not to kind of name drop, but Chris Germer has been a mentor
Yes.
of mine for 15 years or so, and he actually officiated my wedding with my wife.
Oh,
Um,
amazing.
but I remember like his book. He and I were both working on books around the same time, and I was writing my first book, Child's Mind, around 2009 or 2010, and he was working on his Mindful Path to Self Compassion. I remember he's like, I'm going to write a book about self compassion. And I remember thinking, like, great idea. Yeah, like, no one's ever going to buy that book. Right.
That's not
But like,
good.
little did I know. Right. But it's like, shows you don't listen to me about writing books. But really, like, I started doing some of those practices and it was like, whoa. I mean, it was like the accelerant, for the mindfulness practice. And I do believe that if you think about mindfulness as, paying attention to the here and now, the acceptance and non-judgment, it's like that acceptance and non-judgment, there's a little bit of self-compassion kind of built into that.
Yes,
But when
yes.
we underline it, pull it out, make it explicit with his sort of like mindful noticing, common humanity, offering yourself self-kindness in some ways, or self-forgiveness, I think that was really for me like suddenly like just like got like this boost of
Mm.
kind of putting it in overdrive, my practice, and it was just so transformative with, I think for me, some of my past mistakes, some of my past
Mm.
regrets and things like that. And it wasn't like letting myself off the hook, but it was like, just like, okay, we all make mistakes. We're all human. We all screw up in our own ways. So it really was very transformative for me,
Mm.
in that point in my life, and continues to be. I think a lot of the
Mm.
simple self compassion phrases are so helpful.
Mhm.
Just sort of the self compassion gestures of placing a hand on my heart deliberately in a moment of suffering or pain or regret or whatever it might
Mm.
be have been so powerful for me. Yeah.
Actually, can you say a
Yeah.
little more about that, because that's super practical. So for listeners and someone, if you have explored it or you're not, like, that's available right here. So if you're someone's listening on the audio, you were placing your hand on your heart, one hand on the heart. So can you say a little bit more of that? I know there's a lot of science behind this too. So
Yeah.
if you guide us through, like, what's happening, we're placing hand on the heart, one hand left or right,
Yeah.
or two, and
And
then
just, yeah, one or two hands on the heart, or even like give yourself a little gentle hug and squeeze or something
yeah.
like that, which is something, the story I often tell is, I was in Finland, I don't know, 15 years ago. So the first time I'd been invited abroad to give a workshop, and was away from home, and I'm in the middle of the workshop, and I, check my phone, which is not, what you're supposed to do as a mindfulness teacher, but I checked my phone, and there's all these messages that are like, "Are you okay? Are you safe? Are you doing all right?" And I looked, and I was like, "Yeah, I'm fine." And I checked the news, and the Boston Marathon bombing had happened,
Oh wow.
and I'm from Boston, right? And a lot of my friends were like
Yeah.
there, running the race or at the finish line or things like that. And my first instinct, right, was actually just to like to touch my heart, right? We hear a
Mm.
tragic story, or we hear someone's tale of pain or suffering, and we often do just touch our heart with, oh my
Yeah.
gosh. And realizing that that is also a natural response to stress, right, or to threat.
Mm.
And I talk often about, there's like the fight or flight response, there's the freeze, faint, fawn, fuck it response, but there's
Yes.
also like, the attend, mindfulness, befriend, compassion response, where we also can, like, I can't, I'm not at the finish line. I'm not going to fight. I'm not going to flee. I'm not going to freeze. Right. I'm also not able to like kind of like attend and be there, but like I can touch my
Mm.
heart in that moment and actually give
Yeah.
myself some compassion, which then actually then does lower like the cortisol, the stress hormone. And cortisol,
Mm.
the stress hormone, I actually learned this a little bit later in my wife's, not my wife's birthing class, our birthing class, although my wife did the birthing part of
Yes.
it. But I remember in that class, they said, well, some people we give them, to induce labor, they need pitocin. And someone's like, well, what's pitocin? I said, well, it's an artificial version of a natural neural hormone called
Oh,
oxytocin. So if
right.
actually you're feeling safe and secure and loving and not stressed, then oxytocin flows. But if you're stressed out, cortisol actually hits the same receptors as
Mm,
oxytocin and it jams them up. So if you're
mm,
stressed while you're trying to give birth, those are jammed up with cortisol. You actually need a kind of extra hit of pitocin to kind of, or oxytocin, right, to wash away the cortisol
yes.
and the stress hormones so that starts to flow. So something like actually placing our hands on our heart
Mm,
activates oxytocin, which then actually literally kind of like either washes away or blocks cortisol from hitting those same receptors.
mm,
And we actually feel calm, we feel safe, we feel loving. We have the attachment piece that, attachment theory is kind of trendy right now. But all of that is what starts to happen. And so,
mm.
just as giving someone a hug, right? We don't always have someone to give a hug to. We're recording this right after Valentine's Day, which is like, okay, you don't have someone to give a hug to, right? Give yourself a hug,
Yes.
right? But like, placing a hand on your heart, giving yourself a hug, right? And kind of just, place your hand there and just
Mm,
feel mindfully just the imprint of your hand
mm,
against your heart, as well as feeling your heart or your chest against your hand.
mm,
And then just feel the warmth of the outline of your hand and see if you can feel it spread inward and outward, almost like you're allowing that warmth to spread through your body for even a few moments. And you might begin to notice if there's a little bit of a shift or a little bit of a change in your physiology and your nervous system. And you can either hold your hands there a little bit longer, or you
mm,
can set them down. It's a podcast, so hopefully no one's driving while they're doing this. But try it at night when you're in bed, or when no one's
mm,
around, and see what starts to shift in your nervous
mm.
system. It's a beautiful self-regulation tool. Yeah.
I naturally just took a deeper breath. I could feel my
Hmm.
shoulders went
Yeah.
down. There's a ah. There's a softening.
Yeah.
I think there's a
Yeah.
softening, which counters a lot of the tightening from stress and agitation and worries and
Yeah.
thinking and just life. So
Yeah.
I could
Yeah.
feel a softening here. So this didn't
Yeah.
take more than like a couple minutes. It's really simple, hands on the heart, taking a few breaths. And you also
Hmm.
mentioned something about self compassion in terms of saying some words or phrases. Is there something you combine with that yourself? Or when you're doing this one, it's just a hand on the heart and breathing,
Yeah,
softening?
sometimes this, just that.
Mm,
Chris Germer, Krista Neff would also say, offering ourselves some kind of name it to tame it validate. I kind of think of it as like name it to tame it self-validation. They call it kind of like a mindful naming. But when we name our emotions,
mm.
you actually watch people in an MRI
Yeah.
machine. Like you put people in there and you show them a difficult emotion and you watch the kind of amygdala limbic system light up. You watch them name it. Oh, suffering, sadness, anger. You actually watch the blood flow back out of the limbic system and into the outer cortices. And so the name it to tame it kind of thing, that's sort of like a mindfulness practice of naming and noticing our thoughts and emotions, like there's actually like a neurobiological correlate to that that's really happening in the
It's
brain.
amazing.
So and this, I mean, it's also what we do as therapist, right? As a therapist, I'm like, oh, it sounds like you're feeling sad about your mother, right? And then
Right.
it's like I'm doing that for someone, and then prefrontal cortex to prefrontal cortex, right? I'm regulating them, right? And we say to kids, use your words instead of your temper tantrum.
Mhm.
But all of this is kind of the same concept. And so we first just name it like this is a moment of suffering, and I'm a
Mm.
little bit I mean, again, sort of self acceptance around the kind of teacher I am. It's like I'm maybe a bit more a little less, what was the word I used before? A little less gravitas. I'm just like, this moment sucks.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
this is a moment of like dog shit
This
insanity.
is
Like just
crappy.
use your words
Yeah.
exactly. And because we can't lie to ourselves. Like we have to use the words that would resonate for us. Like
Yeah.
just like if you go to a therapist, like, oh, I'm so sorry, right? It's like no, it needs to sound authentic. You
Yeah.
need to give
Yeah.
yourself the authentic words, not give yourself the Mr. Rogers thing. And so, like, doing that, sort of like this moment of suffering, or this just totally sucks, right? And then inviting ourselves into that common humanity.
Yeah.
Again, of like, we all suffer, or nobody's perfect, or we all make mistakes, or pencils have erasers, or whatever it might be. That's sort of the common
Pencils have
humanity
erasers. I love that.
element. I was a teacher, for a while, so I had
Yeah,
to
yeah.
pick that one up. And then some words of kindness or forgiveness. May I let this go? May I forgive myself? May I remember progress, not perfection? That kind of setting an intention, making ourselves a kind wish. A little
Mm,
shift I do from Chris and Kristen too is sometimes in a group I'll invite us to kind of first make that wish for others in the group,
yeah.
and then now see if you can accept that wish from the rest of the room. They're
Mm,
all wishing that for you, right? Remind yourself they've all made a small mistake as well, right? They've all beaten themselves up too. Now, let's kind of come back and remember, it wouldn't be polite not to accept a gift from somebody. So see if you can open to their wish for you if you can't quite open
mm.
to it for yourself in this moment.
Really beautiful. This combination of including some of these words and connecting, and there's something about seeing others, like just
Mm-hmm.
like me. There's a whole meditation on loving kindness about
Yeah.
that. Like just like me, here's someone else just like me has hopes and aspirations. Here's someone
Yeah.
is just like me who actually has experienced sorrow. Here's someone just
Right.
like me who wants to have a good night's sleep.
Mm-hmm.
This one
Mm-hmm.
just like me who just had a heartache. I mean,
Yeah. Right.
there's so much like separateness that happens in the world, and we forget that actually even the people we disagree with, they're actually
Yeah.
a lot of things. They're just like me, but
Right.
they have different
Right.
viewpoints.
So many. So many. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this beautiful way that you're describing connecting. You remind me as well when you're talking about this playful way of name it to tame it. I use that in my
Mm-hmm.
clinical work, and I also
Mm-hmm.
combine it with ACT, acceptance commitment therapy, and with
Such good
that.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really good because then we're bringing in as well. We can give it external name, like giving a
Mm-hmm.
cartoon character. Here's the whatever. When I get agitated, Bugs Bunny takes over, or whatever. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I can work with that. And I just remembered, one of your books, because we're talking as well about emotions, and one of your books is called "Emotions Are Like Farts." And what-
Yep. Feelings are like farts. Yep. Yep. Yep.
or
Impermanence,
feelings? Is it
man.
feelings are like farts? Yeah.
Feelings are like farts. Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so can you say more about this? Is it a team book, or just remind me? This is like what a great title.
Thank you. So this came out. This is in the pandemic. A friend of mine, who had actually done another book with, texted me, and she was like, "Oh, my daughter just like farted and said feelings are like farts. They just fade away." And she's like, "We should do a book on that." And I was like, "Yeah, yeah, okay, maybe." And then like 2 months later, I was like just taking a walk, and I was like, "Oh my god, that idea is brilliant!" And we like over text message, just like in like 25 minutes, like over text, like wrote the entire book,
Oh wow.
with just like a series of it was like, they can linger but they never last. If they ever hurt, you should probably talk to an adult that you trust. It's not cool to blame them on anybody else, right? Just sort of like all these like parallel, they can be silent but they're never deadly, all these different parallels. And it's been fun because it's first of all, it's like totally true. And then secondly, it's actually this kind of like lovely mindful Buddhist sort of take on the impermanence of
Yeah.
all things, right? Of all phenomena, including our mental phenomena. So it's yeah, that was so fun. That was so fun.
I love this. I mean, this applies to adults too, like in terms of working with
Yeah,
emotions.
right,
Like,
right, right.
I mean, there is a child in all of us, right? And what actually a lovely way of working with emotions. They come, they go. There's impermanence.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking about it, like I guess there's shame, right? Like like saying feelings like farts. Like there's shame. Oh, I farted, or I had an emotion. What's wrong with me? I felt
Right,
anxious,
right.
and you're
Yeah,
putting down the shame. It's just an emotion.
yeah,
We're
yeah,
allowed. We're
yeah,
allowed
yeah.
emotions. Something else I see often people struggle with is the emotion is not the problem, but how we get upset at it or reactive to it.
Right.
that spiral
Exactly.
things.
And
And
then
I
we end
wonder,
up dysregulated, like with the
right?
fighting it or suppressing it or right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So can
Yeah.
you speak a little bit about? I know you've been doing some work around self-regulation, emotional regulation.
Hmm.
Maybe if we can just define it for listeners, if that's a new concept or idea, what is emotional self-regulation?
Yeah. It's sort of a very trendy term. Like, emotional regulation is not, kind of like getting rid of our emotions, right? It's responding, not reacting to our emotions, right? It's being able to see and feel the emotion, but not have it totally take over,
Mm,
right? But also not having our other systems, our relational system, totally take over because of our insecure attachment or whatever it might be, and also not having our totally perfectly rational mind take over either. It's
mm,
like, well, according to my calculations, mathematically, like marriage doesn't make sense. So I'm going to get divorced. And it's like, no, that doesn't make sense either, right? We have to use sort of a combination of all of those kind of parts of our brain and nervous system physiology to actually kind of make good decisions, right?
mm,
And have skillful means, skillful actions in the world. And so emotion regulation, you can also think, so it's about responding, not reacting to our emotions. It's
mm,
about, I think about, Dan Goleman and sort of emotional intelligence, and he talks about how like, a lot of people feel like emotions don't have a place anywhere. Other people feel like, okay, well, emotions don't have a role in the workplace. And the reality is like our emotions, our unregulated emotions, right, are not helpful. Our regulated
mm.
emotions are helpful, right? When we can see the emotion, not be the emotion, and we get a little bit of distance, which we do
Ah,
by naming to tame, by noticing the sensation of the emotion before it turns into the behavior that was driven by the emotion, right? So that kind of thing, I think, is
mm.
is is important to recognize, and that to me is what emotion regulation really is. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
How do you make a distinction for folks? Sometimes people think self-regulation is about control. I have to control my emotions. I have to
Hmm.
stuff it down. I have to, and we do the same thing. I see a lot of people with thoughts. I have to shut it down. Now I'm regulating
Hmm.
them. It's like, well, it's not about shutting down. So, can you say a little more about the difference between self-regulation and kind of control?
Yeah, I mean, self control itself is also important. Kind of
Yes,
controlling, managing our impulses, right? That's also key,
the
to
behavior.
not give in to
Yes,
every impulse.
yeah,
But I think it's about not like we can't control our emotions. To me, it's like we can't
right.
we can't necessarily change the channel on our emotions, but we can turn the volume down a little bit. So it's
Mm,
not that emotions are the kind of dominating. If we look at to get a little wonky, sort of a tripartite model of the brain with these three sort of systems in place, the relational drive, the emotional drive, and the kind of more rational, kind of brain. But I
mm,
think that to me is what self-regulation is. And that's what mindfulness helps us to do. It
right.
helps us to also see the emotion. And if you look at kind of like quote unquote Eastern or Buddhist kind of models of psychology, right? They're about like emotion arises first in the body. That's why, as I understand it, and you're more of an MBSR expert than me, but as far as I
Mm,
understand it, that's part of why MBSR often starts with and emphasizes so much the body scan, because it's
yes.
where we can see emotions start to arise, see the stories we tell ourselves about our emotions start to arise, and so we can kind of catch it there before it turns into something that's not so helpful for us or is
Yes.
destructive for us, to put it a little bit more bluntly. And I think that to me is also about regulation, but just being able to see it, right? I mean, if you look at the Dan Goleman model of emotional intelligence, it's
Mm,
first there's self-awareness, then there's self-regulation, right? That those are the two kind of first, two of the, I don't know, five or six like pillars of
yeah.
EI or something like that. But yeah.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I just wanted to quickly thank you for stopping by and watching this content. It truly means the world to me that you're interested in creating positive change. I also want to invite you to join our amazing community. I have free events online about mindfulness, mindfulness based stress reduction, laughter, as well as retreats that you can do from the comfort of your own home. And are you ready for this? Self paced program that you can do about mindfulness and stress reduction. So you can join the newsletter below to stay up to date on all these goodies. And if you haven't subscribed, go ahead and press that button. It really helps me to keep this content going and reach out to more guests. Thank you so much again, and may you continue enjoying watching this episode. We have to be aware of them. But it's so interesting you say this because so many think emotions just something in my head. But it's like, what
Hmm.
about the rest of the body? And it's so helpful to tune into that. And
Yeah.
I often tell
Yeah.
people, like, it's okay to feel emotions. Like, it's okay to feel angry, but we're
Hmm.
not
Hmm.
letting anger take the steering wheel, so to speak. So we're not letting anger, like,
Yeah.
if you have a thought, or you're like, I want to just take this chair and throw it out the window. There's anger. Okay, it's okay,
Hmm.
but we're not
Hmm.
acting on it. Like, that's the problem.
Right. Right. I want to throw
So
this shirt out there.
now we get in trouble. But the
Yeah.
emotion and the
Yeah.
thoughts around it, that we can bring self-compassion to, that we can feel, okay, it's
Yeah.
okay right now, I'm just agitated, it's okay,
Yeah.
just breathe,
Yeah.
not what's
Yeah.
wrong with me, I can't believe I'm having this thought. And then we kind of
Hmm.
shame ourselves.
Yeah.
So I guess in your work, in terms of what supports self-regulation, is what else comes up for you? So we have mindfulness, we have self-compassion that can support self-regulation. What else?
Hmm.
I know there's we're kind of giving listeners a preview of upcoming book, but what else can you, in terms of mindfulness and self-regulation?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's so many other strategies. I mean, one thing I think when it comes to like working with kids is like, how can we use the breath? How can we
Mm,
use movement? How can we use play? How can we use, so many other things that teach self-regulation, that teach co-regulation. And
mm,
co-regulation is also the idea that when we are regulated, we can more effectively help other people to regulate. That we can be that
right.
prefrontal and insular cortex for other people when they are dysregulated. Or as like I say in my workshops, I've got a slide with a picture and it says something like, "Never in the history of calming down has anyone ever calmed down by being told to calm down." Right? It's like, you have to
Just
keep your, or something
relax.
by being yelled at to calm down, right? Who wants a stressed out mindfulness teacher, right? That sounds terrible, right? So it's like, how do we embody? And as my friend Win has some quote that I'm going to mangle, but it's like, embodiment is acceptance of emotions in the body, or something like that. It's a beautiful. She says it much
Mm,
more beautifully than I do. But when we embody mindfulness and regulation, we have enough to spare for that other person,
mm,
right? So that we can invite them into our regulation, because our emotions are contagious, right? So you walk into, I mean, I don't know, if I come home, after a tough day at work and traffic's terrible, right? And I come home stomping my feet and, kick the dog, like, it's like, well, that sets everybody off. If I,
right.
and actually this is something I taught a client recently. I was like, well, just like, you got a stressful job, man, just like park in your driveway. When you're in your driveway, just take 3 breaths, breathing in. I know I'm breathing in, breathing out. I know that I'm breathing
Mm,
out. And then walking into the house, like, at least you're not necessarily bringing the calm, but at least you're not bringing the
mm,
chaos.
you're
Um,
right.
so like that can be, I think, then we can be, I mean, again, to look at sort of like, Buddhism, to me anyway, a lot of Buddhism and Eastern philosophy don't, karma is not exactly a law of cause and effect. It's about
Right.
causes and conditions, right? How do we,
Mm,
I can't make someone change. All I can do is create the conditions externally and internally for them
right.
to want to change, right? That's how change happens. It's not like I can force someone. And
Even
so,
ourselves.
again, right, even ourselves, right? I
Yeah.
don't know where I'm going with this, by the way, doctor, but like, but anyway, I'm kind of off on a tangent here, but where was I? Something about co-regulation,
Right.
but which starts with self-regulation. Our emotions are contagious. I don't know, but yeah,
So here is,
yeah,
mindfulness and self-regulation. So you're naming a couple of different ways we can
hmm,
self-regulate using mindfulness, but it feels like it links back to awareness. So for us to
yeah,
regulate, the first thing before we get to using any tools, we need to be aware. Oh, right now I'm a little
hmm,
upset. Right now I'm
yeah,
having this thing,
yeah,
and maybe let me take a breath. It is okay. Like, we're actually working with ourselves, right? When
hmm,
we're dysregulated, and there's some kind of deep impact. I know there's research on the nervous system and the importance of managing this nervous system. Sometimes it's easier for folks to connect that way. Oh, this is what mindfulness is doing too. It's calming
Hmm.
the nervous system.
Yeah.
Oh. So is there
Yeah.
things that
Yeah.
you've been looking into in terms of that, like nervous system and self-regulation? Is there things that come across your work that you share with people?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are also, thinking about like, how else can we regulate ourselves? I mean, there's so many other. A person whose work I really like is Deb Dana, who talks and writes a lot about polyvagal theory, which she has kind of translated for a non-totally academic audience from a guy named Stephen Porges.
Right.
But one of the things Deb talks about that I love is she talks about, we all know what triggers are, right? Like my anxiety was triggered, my addiction was triggered, my trauma was
Right.
triggered, and it's almost overused. But it's the people, places, and things that kind of get us. Our nervous system feels unsafe, and we, then we feel unsafe, and then that turns into a thought, then that turns into a behavior, right? All that kind of behavior chain, or kind of conditions. Um, she, and again, back to kind of conditions, right? She talks also about glimmers, right? Glimmers
Mm,
are the people and places and things that are the opposite of a trigger, the people,
mm.
places, and things that cue us to remind us that we are safe, that we
Oh,
are safe enough to be vulnerable, to open up in therapy, to close our eyes in a meditation, to
right.
like go to the party and decide not to drink, or sit through the difficult conversation with the boss instead of running out of the room screaming with anxiety,
Mm,
to feel the fear and do it anyway, essentially. And so I
right.
love how she talks about glimmers as opposed to triggers. And so, there are things we can do ourselves to regulate, and there are also environmental things that we can be aware of, and then even deliberately
Mm.
cultivate, right? That cue us or cue other people for safety. Yeah.
Oh, I so love this because this is priming us to be on the lookout as well for things that are
Yes.
glimmers, right?
Gratitude
Rather,
style.
yeah,
Yeah.
because when the
Exactly.
nervous system is dysregulated, it's in threat mode. Everything's a threat, and
Right.
it's watching out for a threat. And
Right.
it's almost like we're helping the gauges. Like, okay, there's no actual danger right now. Let's look for signs that tell us there's no danger, right?
Yeah.
This is not saying
Yeah.
life is rosy and no bad things happen
Right.
because bad things
Right.
happen.
Right. Yeah.
But when there's
Yeah.
nothing bad happening, our mind is not
We have to
going
be
to the
aware of
glimmers.
it.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
But it's like that. There's that meme that's like, oh, I just noticed I've been like, holding my breath and hunching my shoulders for the last 15 years. And it's like,
Right.
but when we're mindful, we're like, oh, I am holding my breath and hunching my shoulders and clenching my jaw. Like, what happens if I just let go of my jaw and unclench my shoulders? Oh, wow, the world actually looks different
Yeah.
um, when we do that. We see different things. Our perception changes when we do
Mm.
that. Yeah, yeah,
That,
yeah,
that's so interesting.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
even our posture
yeah.
changes when we become aware
Right,
of our
right.
body. Yeah. This is so interesting. So, here's a preview of one of your upcoming books. And I don't know how many more books you're gonna have in next year, but I know you're working on a couple of books. And the other one is around communication, mindfulness and
Hmm.
communication. So I wonder if you can tell us a few things as a preview about how mindfulness can support us. And it's such an important component, at least in mindfulness based stress reduction. There's a whole class
Yeah.
about it, mindful
Oh,
communication. So
cool. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So can you share a little bit about for you, what are you looking into in terms of mindfulness and communication?
Yeah, well, it started with, I sort of started working a little bit, moving from kids to sort of business audiences and corporate audiences in some ways that are not all that different, but also kind of what's needed there, also what's needed in the world with kind of we're talking past each other in all these ways. I
Right.
also am trying to write books that I want to about things I want to learn about. I feel like the best thing about writing a book is someone pays you to like read 100 books about a topic and articles and synthesize them. It's like getting paid to get a master's degree or something. And so it's called The Neuroscience of Negotiation,
Mm.
and it's divided into 4 parts. And the first part is how to listen, and the second part is how to speak, and then it's how to agree, and then it's how to disagree. And the
Oh, wow.
listening chapter is really like the through line. Actually, that's why kind of Judd came up with curiosity. The through line is really curiosity. Like, how can we be authentically curious, right?
Mm.
There's all this books will teach you how to like look like you're curious and paying attention, but can you actually be curious. And then if you are able to be curious, then you actually can pay attention, and not some like active listening class where you learn how to say the right way. So that's super
Right.
fascinating. And the science is like mind blowing. It's like, a good listener brings out more in the speaker, like helps them come
Mm,
up with better ideas, helps them be more articulate, right? And a bad listener, we've actually been in that situation, probably all of us.
yeah.
Someone's not really listening to us, we're stumbling over our words, we're inarticulate. It's like a downward cycle or an upward cycle. The chapter on speaking has been interesting, kind of looking at body language in different ways. And
Mm,
I just finished up a chapter on the neuroscience of humor, which is just like so fun to learn about. And actually, that it's better, like more important than being funny is actually kind of being good humored, like being an
mm,
easy laugh, like laughing at people's jokes. And the more relaxed we are, the more we can laugh. The more we laugh, the more we relax, the more we co-regulate with each other, the more we build trust. Even telling a bad joke, I mean, I kind of reference like telling a corny dad joke or something,
mhm.
like that actually increases trust and respect because people appreciate that someone's at least making an effort.
Right.
um, there's some science of swearing, which is fun.
There's the
And then
swearing.
the swearing is great. Releases dopamine, and endorphins, kind of to manage pain. It also builds trust and credibility because it sort of shows that you're not self-censoring in these
Mm,
different ways. And then disagreement, kind of trying to figure out a lot about how to disagree kind of more effectively, like actually a lot about like what does the science of couples therapy tell us about how
mm,
to disagree better, what are sort of the times when conversations are getting toxic, how can we bring that into the dinner time Thanksgiving
mm.
debate, or with our uncle, or kind of how can we bring that in as a society in different ways. How do we set boundaries more effectively? and
Oh,
then
wow.
and then the how to agree chapter is a lot about co-regulation, self-regulation. As
What
my
is it?
friend
Agree,
Hal
did you
likes to
say the
say,
last one? How do we
how to
agree?
agree.
Agree,
Yeah,
agree.
actually, I think
Yeah,
it's how to agree, and then it's how to disagree. But
right.
the agreement chapter is also about kind of co-regulation, belonging. Right? People are often will kind
Mm,
of double down on an idea when they don't feel sort of like a part of the group. And how do we kind of build
wow.
bridges and expand our sense of group? But it's why we feel so threatened when people disagree with us or disagree with our sense of identity. So I've learned so much. I could talk forever about that, but I've had a lot
That
of
is.
fun. It's due very soon. I'm like deep in it now in my edits, but I'm
Yeah.
having a blast with that. Yeah, yeah,
Well, stay
yeah.
tuned,
Super
folks. This
fun.
is coming up, and we'd definitely love to have you back with all your upcoming books. You have such
Love
fascinating
to.
work. And
Thank you.
one of the things as well you're naming about those, there's a thread that I know you also speak about, this post traumatic growth. So here's communication we
Mm-hmm.
spoke about, but there's something about when you named earlier the glimmers. There's something about we can grow through adversity. Like there's a theme. I even have a book I
Mm-hmm.
think called that. Grow. We grow through. We
How we grow through what we go through, which is maybe
Yes,
more of a
how we
tongue
grow through.
twister than
Yeah, yeah. I was like, they say it
yeah.
backwards. Yeah, yeah. So there's something,
Right.
just like
Right.
the glimmers you said, we also focus on like challenging aspect, but here's post-traumatic growth, which interested me
Yeah.
also when I did my research on trauma for my dissertation at the time. So is there things that have surprised you about this? Are you finding interesting? And what is post-traumatic growth for those who have never heard of it? Like growth from trauma.
Yeah, I started working on that during the pandemic when I got asked to do talks about trauma, and I didn't want them just to be super depressing.
Yeah,
And one
yeah,
of the
yeah.
first things I found is a big misconception that most people who've been through traumatic experiences actually come through them stronger with what's called post
Mm,
traumatic growth than post traumatic stress disorder. And we just assume, oh, everyone who's been through something
yeah.
tough has post traumatic stress. And it's a bit of a hard line to share, at this point in society, because we want to acknowledge that people are suffering, but also I think we want to remember that people can grow, that that's what humanity does. And anthropology tells us that, spirituality tells us that, neuroscience tells us that,
Mm,
behavioral science tells us that, history tells us that. and so like just looking for like what are the ways that we can actually create the conditions under which post traumatic growth is even more likely to happen. The caveat is, I think, I don't want to be coming at people with a sort of toxic positivity around like
Right.
you should have post traumatic growth. It's like, oh, this is
No.
possible, and here's some things you can do, where maybe it's not going to happen for you on every single level, but maybe
Right.
you still feel some shame, but you also feel some empowerment. Maybe you still feel some anxiety, but you also feel some hope or wisdom or courage, right? That it doesn't
Yeah.
have to be like a one-to-one, but these things happen kind of in tandem, just as any growth happens, like not all at once, but in different ways at different times. So that was a very fun book to
Yeah.
write. It was a lot about self-compassion in there, too. But we need
Yeah.
some adversity in our lives, and I think one reason why I think there is more post traumatic stress recently, people have
Mm.
been a lot of people have been exposed to very little adversity and then suddenly to a lot, rather than a kind of titrated
Ah.
dose. And we need difficult, kids need to fail, right? Kind of the was it the gift of failure, like Jess Leahy's work. They also
Mm.
need, to kind of experience discomfort to learn how to tolerate it, which our screens don't let us do. Kids need, I mean, it's like we look at
Even
the
boredom.
epidemic of peanut allergy. They need boredom,
Yeah.
right? But like kids have peanut allergies because we said no peanuts at all, right? But
Yeah.
actually, then we ended up having more of a peanut allergy problem, less resistance and resilience to peanuts. So it's like we actually need the right amount of that stuff
Yeah.
to get through it. That's a larger kind of social question, societal
Mm.
question, but I think it's a really interesting one. But to be able to learn how to kind of manage some discomforts actually help us to build up more strength for more challenging ones too. Yeah.
Yeah. I so appreciate you saying that. This is not about toxic positivity. Like it's actually
Yeah.
both, or a lot of traditions talk about non-dual, right? So non-dual, it's
Hmm.
both. Like I know you
Right.
speak about in your,
Right. It's both,
around your book,
and yeah.
you like you losing your mother, I lost my father. And it's like,
Yeah.
it's both.
Yeah.
It's both. It's like deep sorrow and pain. And
Yeah. Yeah.
there's learning. Like it's both.
Yeah.
So here's what you're
Yeah.
naming. We're needing just right amount. Well, I tell you, I can literally have like 3 more hours with you right
I know,
here,
right?
literally.
Could
And
keep going.
I'm just aware
Next time
of
in Vancouver, we'll just record our lunch or something.
yeah, yeah, we'll keep recording. Yeah, it's like a weekly podcast. It's so enjoyable. And I wanted to ask you one final thing. The name of this
Hmm.
podcast is Pause to Elevate. So when you think of
Uh-huh.
pause to elevate, what does that mean for you?
So this is hilarious because I spent yesterday editing a chapter on what I call the wait method. Why am I talking? Or what am I thinking? As Oren J. Sofer says. But it's like an acronym. The whole chapter is about the power of pausing.
Mm,
Pausing before we act. Pausing before we speak. And all of these amazing things that happen in pauses that are big and small. Right. That's where there's a crack in everything. That's where the light gets in.
right.
Leonard Cohen and that kind of thing. It's like, how do we put these cracks in? How do we put these pauses in? It allows our nervous system to settle. It allows us to then respond rather than react. And it's so powerful, to then actually, yeah, I think elevate, kind of bring things to the next level. Like rather
Mm,
than just like grinding away,
yeah.
right? We pause, and things actually then, I mean, I'm talking about it in terms of communication in this book, but
Yeah.
when we pause in a conversation, actually, the conversation elevates. It gets bigger, but in all aspects, of our life, I think this is so true. Yeah, very cool.
Mm. Thank you for your beautiful work, for sharing this deep, actually fun wisdom. Like it's fun. You will bring playfulness, but deep knowledge, deep understanding, and so embodied, like through your personal experience. Which I really love that combination. Like you're the scientist, you're the academic, but you're the embodied practitioner, which We really
Hmm.
need to have both. We need to have both, like honor
Yeah.
both. So I just want to thank you. And how can people find you? What's the best way? And we'll put all of that in the show notes. What's the best way for folks? Is it through your website or social media? What's the best
Yeah,
way?
my website's drchristopherwillard.com, Dr. Christopher Willard, or Enlightened Livelihoods is sort of like my speaker workshop page.
Hmm.
I'm on Instagram. It's at Dr. Chris Willard, Dr. Chris Willard, and LinkedIn, whatever. I'm too old for TikTok, maybe at some point. But yeah, pretty. I'm happy to people reach out. I respond to every email I get. So please stay in touch. Yeah.
I will put all of that in the show notes. And also, by the way, we didn't speak about it, but you also have a publishing course if someone's interested in like writing. Sorry, not publishing, a writing course. So feel free, folks, to
Writing and
check it out.
publishing.
Writing and
Yeah.
publishing. So you
Yeah.
have so many offerings. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you. And I really look forward to staying in touch and not only having you back, but really, I don't know, I feel there might be some collaboration
I
in the
think so.
works.
I love it.
So,
I love it. I also love Vancouver. So next time
yeah.
I'm out there, we should definitely spend some time. But yeah,
Uh,
thank you for this. This has been great.
Thank you so much. And I also want to thank all the listeners for listening. If you're watching, for watching. If you found this useful, please share, friend, family, anyone you think could benefit from this work around self compassion, kindness, resilience, mental health. I think we can all benefit. Please help us spread the word. And if you have not subscribed, please do so. It really helps me to keep sharing this work. Thank you, and may your moments be filled with ease, and may you be present in as many of them. Thank you. Thank you so much for watching. And if you enjoyed this content, check out what's coming up next right over here. Thank you.